Details and a complete listing of what's happening in our city, go to tvshows.com. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned to CILU 102.7 FM.
I'm going on to this year until I get a record contract. Then I'm going to make a video. Then they're going to make a video of us, and we're going to be famous. Then Mommy's going to come back and live with us. And when I grow up, I'm going to do solo projects and get married to someone very famous, but I'm not sure who exactly.
Who told you all this?
My daddy.
Your daddy's lying. None of this is going to happen. You know why? Because you're ugly. I'm sorry to say it, but you're an ugly little girl. Just ask anyone.
My daddy says that I'm pretty, and when I grow up, I'm going to be a beautiful lady.
No, you're going to be an ugly lady. You'll probably be fat and work as a cashier. And no one is going to want to marry you. You see, parents aren't allowed to tell the truth about certain things. Now, don't cry. Don't be upset. I don't want to see you crying. You really want to be famous?
Yes.
Maybe I can help. Would you like that? I can make you pretty. And all you have to do is sign your little name. Can you do that?
First, you heard Satan tragically buying the soul of a fame-struck little girl from the 1992 surrealistic Canadian road movie Highway 61 by 90s indie director Bruce MacDonald. Satan, of course, is, was, or became the official anti-hero of Christendom, the opposite of God, the Ahrimanic pole of darkness, somehow also a necessary part of the dialectic of freeing up human thinking to find your own way beyond simplistic and reactionary moral codes and social mores. That's probably why the devil was always such a favorite of romantic poets, Enlightenment philosophers, and even degenerate wackos like Benjamin Franklin, who frequently attended campy 18th century Parisian black mass ceremonies. Not so much to pledge his soul to evil, I think, but probably to pledge that his love for truth and humor was stronger than dogma and brave enough to inspect things that might initially appear obscene and upsetting. After that, we heard Dave Porter's intro theme from AMC's Breaking Bad, probably the most famous TV show in which the main character goes from hero to villain, slowly becoming a criminal monster as he breaks bad in the high-stakes meth game of the Arizona desert. I'm Layman Pascal, and you're listening to CILU 102.7 FM, where today's episode of the Cinematic Asylum has sold its soul to oppositeness. That's right, we're wrong today as we delve into music and shows around the theme of reversal. But before we get into all that, here's a message from our sponsor. Hi there. Today's episode of the Cinematic Asylum is brought to you by Vest Fest West East. That's right. You've tried the rest of the Vest Fests, now try the best. In the proud tradition of Vest Fest West, the West Coast's premier events for vests, vest-making, and vest-related accessories for over 15 years, now Thunder Bay, Ontario is happy to host Vest Fest West East. Come on down to the newly renovated Vest Dome on Shelgamoth Street North, every day from noon to midnight, and to get in for 10% off, tell them you're a guest there at my behest. Yes, have you tried the rest of the Vest Fests and you're looking for the greatest now, not the least, look no further than Vest Fest West East.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be. Every instinct I have in every aspect of life, be it something to wear, something to eat, it's all been wrong. Everyone.
Tuna on toast, coleslaw, cup of coffee.
Yeah. No, wait a minute. I always have tuna on toast. Nothing's ever worked out for me with tuna on toast. I want the complete opposite of tuna on toast. Chicken salad on rye, untoasted, with a side of potato salad and a cup of tea.
Well, there's no telling what can happen from this.
It's often wrong. It's often wrong. It's often wrong. Every instinct I have in every aspect of life, it's often wrong. Nothing's ever worked out for me with tuna on toast. Nothing's ever worked out for me with tuna on toast. It's often wrong.
I love how your eyes close whenever you kiss me, and when I'm away from you, I love how you miss me. I love the way you always treat me tenderly, but darling, most of all, I love how you love me. I love how your heart beats whenever I hold you. I love how you think of me without being told. I love the way your touch is always heavenly. But darling, most of all, I love how you love me. I love how your eyes close whenever you kiss me, and when I'm away from you, I love how you miss me. I love the way your touch is always heavenly. But darling, most of all, I love how you love me. I love how you hug me. I love how you squeeze me, tease me, please me, love how you love me. I love how you love me.
This is CILU 102.7 FM. I'm Layman Pascal, locked up safely in the cinematic asylum, and that was the FM radio gods overlaid on Seinfeld's George Costanza in a famous episode where he gains almost superhuman powers and turns his life around by doing the opposite of his own every impulse. Not too far, really, from the tantric and ascetic ritual practices of classical monks who struggled against ordinary thinking, feeling, and action in order to attain some higher power or more intense sense of self. After that, I Love How You Love Me by the Paris Sisters from Twin Peaks: The Return, in which famously the hero FBI agent Cooper has been replaced from the inside out by his primary enemy and villain of the original series, Bob, the parasitic demon who inhabits humans to feed on pain and fear. Everything is the other way around today. You know, back when I was foolish enough to teach people meditation, one of the things I'd do was ask them not to meditate. Let's take 10 minutes, I'd say, right now, I'd say, to close our eyes, I'd say, and just sit here without meditating at all. Do whatever you like inside your own mind. Just make sure that you absolutely are not doing any meditation, not even anything remotely resembling meditation. If you catch yourself starting to meditate, stop immediately, and when the 10 minutes is up, I'll ask whether you succeeded in not meditating or whether you failed abysmally and inadvertently found yourself meditating a little despite your own best intentions. Now, of course, the whole point of the exercise was that is a form of meditation. A relaxed vigilance and introspective intentionality and curiosity in the observation of arising patterns in consciousness are all required for that exercise. It's a meditation instruction phrased as anti-meditation instruction so that you can meditate without the pressure of thinking you have to meditate, without falling back on one of your already learned and pre-programmed meditation methods, and without mistaking the idea of meditation for meditation. Throw the word out, see if you can still do it. That's the subtle magic of reversals sometimes. And speaking of throwing words out, let's see what you think of this nonsense. I've often recommended to friends who are a little more Christian than myself, try to make sure you're not just getting trapped in the words about your religion. How do you know if you really love the Lord, or if you just love the sound of loving the Lord, love telling people you love the Lord, or listening to other folks talk about loving the Lord? Are you really in connection with the deeper truth, the real thing being discussed, the actual entity or pattern or shape or power? Or on the contrary, are you just in some kind of language fetishists club that mistakes itself for a religion? Well, the only way you could really be sure, the only way to try to grow more deeply toward the reality beyond the superficial names and words, would be to try to do your practices and have your feelings without those words or other similar words to rely on as a crutch. Imagine going through your Bible and crossing out the word God whenever it appears and inserting instead the word Satan or feces or syphilis. Sounds a little shocking at first, I admit, grotesque, disrespectful maybe, but it's only disrespectful to the conventional wording. It's not disrespectful to the things that the words are supposed to be indicating. Those things are never really shown or honored or disgraced by the combination of letters in a particular language. The reality stands relatively free of the words. But are you capable of reading your Bible with the highest sounding words switched out for the lowest, the nicest words switched out with the grossest? Can you still contact the thing, the entity, the power that you focus on, regardless of the mere combination of letters and common social associations you assume people have with those particular letters in that particular order? If you can't do that, you might want to ask yourself whether you do have a relationship to the things being spoken of in your Bible, or if you only have a relationship with the speaking, with the words, with the superficial social community that treats those words as having predictable positive and negative associations. Do you love God, or do you love the words that your social group treat as positive? It's a good question, and it comes to us through the gift of reversals. That was John Ottman's main theme from The Usual Suspects, a film with a famous last-second reversal in which the mild-mannered Gimp is shockingly and somewhat edifyingly revealed to have been Kaiser Soze all along. Thank God I don't believe in spoiler alerts. Okay, reversers, let's talk about the difference between having a critical social distance and having access to the weapons of criticism. What does that mean? Well, imagine you're an adolescent who goes off to university, and despite the fact that you have almost no experience of people in the world, the fact that you're still a juvenile in many ways, you are encouraged now to be an activist, perhaps even a progressive militant of some kind. You're given thought tools derived from the work of some of the most brilliant and complex thinkers of the last century: postmodernists, feminists, deconstructionists, neo-Marxists, intersectionalists, pluralists, hermeneutic, culture skeptics, the usual suspects. Many amazing thinkers have their words poured into your ears through the medium of your half-educated professors and half-competent textbooks, but you aren't really prepared by life and human maturity to regenerate these high-level thought systems in yourself. So instead, maybe you just start wielding those words and phrases as blunt social weapons. You start running around like a reactive medievalist, lashing out at whoever feels to you like an enemy of the pure culture, analyzing the world in terms of a war between large popular groups, trying to enforce a quasi-ecclesiastical speech code predicated on status concerns, treating humanism, rationalism, and individualism with an aggressive cynicism or dismissal that you really can't quite intellectually justify, even though you think maybe you'll get there. Sounds ludicrous, but apparently this actually does happen to some people. They become armed with the tools of social criticism, but yet remain over-identified. They lack the actual critical distance between themselves and the forms of society, including all the forms of their own social thinking and feeling. The very distance and skepticism that enabled those great thinkers to come up with these profound new forms of deconstructive and reconstructive criticism. Replacing a fixed pattern of social norms that makes you furious with a fixed pattern of social norms that strikes you as ideal is something both the left and right are prone to do. It seems straightforward, but it doesn't necessarily take us forward. It's arguably more pre-modern than postmodern. To be postmodern, you have to have an actual, ironic, critical, counter-contextual space of intelligent relationship between you and the patterns of society. The main thing that liberates a new world is this space and the freedom that it allows, not any fixed set of insights that purports to have been discovered already from in this space. Many people could discover many different things and say them in many different ways, and yet all have a shared intelligence, a shared tone, a shared way of being in the world that produces a less oppressive, more intelligent, more decent way of relating to ourselves and each other. This new embodied way of being, this new possibility for civilization, depends on the proliferation of the skill from which postmodernism is derived. It does not depend upon the proliferation or enforcement of any particular set of ideas associated with the vocal advocates of postmodernity or any other radical social change. It's simply not very radical to try to enforce a new pattern of thought through conflict, dogma, repetition, hysteria, intense emotional identification, and political mechanisms. That's very old, maybe. Maybe it's a way of the past. Maybe it's imperialism and drag. By using conceptual tools without embodying the conceptual distance implied by those tools, you enter the criticism schism on the wrong side. How do we correct that? Well, if you're being pre-conventional with post-conventional thought tools, the answer might be to reverse it all and see if you could be post-conventional with pre-conventional or merely conventional thought tools, as I'm sure you will agree. I mention this because it leads us to another weird notion about reversals. Suppose you were to make a very subtle and peculiar argument in favor of maintaining a seemingly traditional social pattern. Could that be done in such a way as to create the critical distance that needs to be embodied? Take the phrase men and women. It's a very common phrase. You hear it constantly. Maybe you say to yourself one day, how come I never hear anyone say women and men? Is that so hard? Would that be so jarring? Shouldn't we be doing that 50% of the time, or at least periodically, so we can break down our habitual thinking a little bit? My God, why are the role-playing traditions of ancient cultures, in which the overt socio-political and economic arena was ascribed to the males, whether they liked it or not, still the active form of speech in our language, placing the men linguistically first when it comes to public activities? What if our speech patterns are helping to perpetuate unthinking oppression? Do we have any wiggle room on that? So you ponder the issue. And at first you side very strongly, very emotionally, with this idea that you ought to disrupt the normal pattern, the old pattern. Maybe you make it your personal rule to always say women and men instead of men and women. But after a while, you start to question whether rules are really the solution. Weren't rules kind of the problem? You don't want to recreate an unfree culture of people who just adopt a new program to obey, so what do you want? Maybe you want a culture of insight, questioning, curiosity, and a sense of people sharing a common freedom from their unthinking obedience to popular habits and phrases. So then imagine you do the following thing. Would this make any sense? Imagine you came up for yourself with a really weird way to explain why it is totally appropriate to say men and women. But it's such a weird explanation and requires so much abstraction and is so different from just saying men and women that it kind of forces people to take a step back, look with new ideas and new eyes, and at least temporarily disidentify with their customary and inherited habits and create that fertile space of embodied critical distance. Maybe you decide, for example, that people with male or female chromosomes or male or female genitalia are sometimes in a more masculine or more feminine mode, activating more or less male or female chemistry inside any male or female body, and that therefore any man or any woman might resonate more with the men or the women part of the phrase men and women. But you don't stop there. You also decide that when males and females are resonating with the archetypal patterns, roughly indicated by words like man and women, that the women archetype is characterized by a greater attentiveness to relationships, while the men archetype is characterized by a greater attentiveness to being centered in oneself and on thing-related tasks. So you decide that perhaps in the phrase men and women, that the and goes with the women. It's men and then it's the and women, because women have this increased relational orientation and capacity statistically. They are additional, but not in any marginalizing sense. They own the capacity of addition itself. In fact, one often hears people speak about the situation of man, and eventually someone, male or female, will say, yes, but what about woman? It comes also. It has an additionality to it. The first phenomenon tries to define itself in focused isolation, which is a bit more classically masculine, and the other phenomenon opens the definition, challenges it, adds something, re-relationalizes the situation. And all of this is encoded by the intelligence of ancient popular folk wisdom within the phrase men and women, so that whenever anyone uses that phrase, they should realize this and look very closely and hear this strange structural resonance among the archetypes. Now, you see what I mean? If that was your argument in favor of using the conventional, customary, historical phrasing, then you're not really in a conventional, customary, historical position at all. Hashtag secret reversals. And now a song oddly about the 1953 Lucille Ball Desi Arnaz film, The Long, Long Trailer, called Everything Right Is Wrong Again.
Everything right is wrong again, just like in the long, long trailer. All the dishes got broken and the car kept driving, and nobody would stop to savor. Wake me when it's over, touch my face, tell me every word has been erased. Don't you want to know the reason why the cover's not appealing? Don't you get the feeling that everything that's right is wrong again? You're a weasel overcome with guilt. Weasel overcome, but not before the damage done. Not healing doesn't stop the feeling. Everything right is wrong again, just like in the long, long trailer. All the dishes got broken and the car kept driving, and nobody would stop to savor. And now the song is over now, and now the song is over now, and now the song is over now, the song is over now. Everything right is wrong again. Every movement follows, every thought is once again. Every five and dime's been gained and spent. Tell me that you like my love. I've been draw the line divided, like a famous screen. You know everything that I know, so I know you are the force that makes me silent. Knowledge that says that everything that's right is wrong again. You're a weasel overcome with guilt. Weasel overcome, but not before the damage done. Not healing doesn't stop the feeling. Everything right is wrong again, just like in a long, long trailer. All the dishes got broken and the car kept driving, and nobody would stop to save her. And now the song is over now, and now the song is over now, and now the song is over now, the song is over now.
To quote the grisly now deceased Zen actor Harry Dean Stanton from the ultra peculiar Emilio Esteve film Repo Man about aliens and car repossession, An ordinary person spends his life avoiding tense situations. A repo man spends his life getting into tense situations. That reversal was part of his code in that movie, a code he tries to pass on to young Emilio Estevez. Repo man's gotta have a code, son, but it's a reverse code. He does the exact opposite of what people usually do in that film, and he's not alone. The Malamatis are a sect of Islamic Sufis from the 9th century known as followers of the Way of Blame. These transcendental weirdos believe that spiritual development is inversely proportional to egotism, and therefore they try to free their spiritual and moral practices from any sense of public reward or private congratulation. To put it bluntly, they privately try to be good people, but they publicly try to appear as bad people who invite shame, humiliation, and scorn from the less spiritually committed citizens around them. The Malamatia believe in the value of self-blame and public shame in order to thwart and purify the ego's craving for the praise and respect of others. Piety for them is a private matter, and that's not so strange, really. In the Christian magic book, the Lord tells his followers to pray in secret and not perform their religion in order to show or impress others. Don't cast them pearls before them swine, he says. And contemporary Buddhist sage Chogyam Trungpa wrote a famous book about spiritual materialism, which he roughly defined as the tendency to think of self-knowledge and self-development and goodness as if they were sports cars, fancy dresses, and corporate status you could acquire. Of course, we all automatically treat goodness as an opportunity to be perceived as good. And maybe it takes a little bit of anticipated glory in order to get us motivated to improve ourselves. But that desire to seem good, to be popular, to be respected, to be thought of as decent and holy could get in the way of actually working on being more decent. Even our legitimate ideals could be a form of idolatry. So these Way of Blame folks solve this odd conundrum by trying to expose themselves to counter-egoic situations. Imagine a very tranquil, very benevolent, very well-behaved, pious monk journeying from the monastery into the village once a month to pick up supplies. And while he's there, making sure to be seen urinating in the street and smoking in front of a no-smoking sign. Can you really imagine what it would be like to do that on purpose? The Malamatis want to attain ruh, union with God, they say, but you must overcome the egoic nafs, they say, to reach the kalb, repository of knowledge and emotions, they say, and then attain sir, the true font of goodness, they say. The Malamatis had their network originally in Nishapur, which is far enough from Baghdad that they could improvise their own customs without too much influence from the big city Sufis. We know about this sect of public reversers originally from the writings of Abu Abad al-Rahman al-Salami, praise be his glorious name, who was well disposed toward the group and still remembered today as something of a Malamati apologist, as we all are sometimes, I think. For Abu Abad al-Rahman al-Salami, praise be his glorious pen, the Malamati strategy of embracing humiliation was a valid, viable, and ultimately pious way of overcoming our instinctive attempt to keep our lower self in charge at all costs. Even your best actions and most righteous states of being might be hypocritical as long as your lower self still feels proud of them and ascribes to you a special positive status. One of their beliefs apparently is that a good person should strive to only have a despised profession. If other people perk up with admiration or interest when you say what you do, then you're a terrible Malamati. You should be a prostitute, a thief, a sewage worker, a member of Congress, or some other widely despised and disparaged occupation, rather than, say, a doctor, lawyer, merchant, writer, or some job the ego might aspire to achieve. That's just the navs talking. It doesn't want you to pass the clab and reach the sir and attain the ru. Anyone who is perceived widely to be a saint is no true saint, according to the Malamati. If you want your goodness to grow and deepen, do it in secret. Don't let anyone know when you've done a good deed. It's an interesting practice. We should all consider it quite seriously. Ask yourself whether you're even capable of concealing your good deeds for very long from others, or whether as soon as you've done something good, you immediately need a cookie, a pat on the head, and a smattering of casual praise from friends, family, and the local newspaper. You could easily get carried away, that is, with this Malamati practice, and who's to say that our perception in the eyes of others and our sense of authentic pride aren't very crucial aspects of both our health and our spiritual growth? But it's definitely worth putting your toe in the water on this one. Trying to keep your good deeds secret and making yourself available for humiliation could be a powerful way to see, if only for a moment, how tenacious your inner PR agent really is.
CILU is supported in part by the students of Lakehead University, our sponsors, and our listeners. At this time, we would like to thank the following sponsors for their continuous support.
The Rec and Culture Division of Thunder Bay, bringing free events to the waterfront in all of Thunder Bay. Check out thunderbay.ca/events for more info on their upcoming community events and follow them on Facebook. Joey's Restaurant, a tasty little place for seafood, located at 595 Arthur Street West. Visit them on Tuesdays for all-you-can-eat fish and chips, Thursdays $4 tacos, and kids eat free Saturdays. Some conditions apply. The Thunder Bay Blues Fest, Log on to tbayblues.ca to keep up with all the news on Thunder Bay's largest annual music festival, entering its 19th year in 2020.
With your feet in the air and your head on the ground, try this trick and spin it, yeah. Your head will collapse and there's nothing in it, and you'll ask yourself, where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind? It's all the way out in the water, see it swimming below. I was swimming in the Caribbean. Animals were hiding behind the rock, except little fish. But they told me he swears, try not to talk to me, koi koi. Where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind? It's all the way out in the water, see it swimming below. With your feet in the air, your head on the ground, try this trick and spin it. Your head will collapse and there's nothing in it, and you'll ask yourself, where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is my mind? Where is? It's all the way out in the water, see it swimming.
Well, that was Where Is My Mind, the Puddle's Pity Party cover version of a song made famous in Fight Club, a film where the narrator's best friend and mentor reverses first into the villain and then into the identity of the narrator himself, who then has to shoot himself in order to kill that other guy. I'm Layman Pascal on CILU 102.7 FM with the Way of Reversals edition of the Cinematic Asylum. Hashtag late 90s existential reversals. Tantric Buddhism and Tantric Hinduism, and now the general global phenomenon of Tantra TM, are sometimes associated with sacred sexuality, but that's only a little part of the reversal logic of the Tantrikas. Their ultimate goal seems to be a kind of full-spectrum enlightenment in which all parts and instincts and energies in the human being are cultivated, refined, converged, and integrated together into some greater harmony. But to do that, they have to extend their spiritual experiments into territories that are often shunned or perceived as worrisome by local and conventional traditional religion and folk morality. Reminds me when Woody Harrelson, who was playing hustler, founder, free speech crusader, and sniper victim Larry Flint, was told in The People vs. Larry Flint that, quote, nobody wants their religion and pornography in the same place, to which he simply said, I do. And so do the Tantrikas, in a way. That is to say, they want their highest and lowest chakras active at the same time. They want religion to embrace sexuality and every other kind of normal energetic behavior that has been quarantined as transgressive in conventional teachings. Some people translate the Pali Sanskrit word tantra as loom and suggest it means that they have to weave in all the different flavors and qualities of the world together into a single glorious oriental carpet of dharmic holiness. During ancient tantric festivals, they would eat fish and meat if those were forbidden by their holy diet. They would worship female deities while everyone else was focused on more rigid authoritarian patriarchal notions of sainthood and godhood. They embraced flesh as part of spirit. They embraced night as part of the day. Reversals. And why not? Surely it takes as much discipline, attention, mutuality, idealism, good-heartedness, and outwitting your own indulgence reactions to be able to really enjoy yourself properly as it does to fight against your desires. Both Tantra and conventional asceticism have value, I think, and what makes them both valuable can be applied to either of them. Really, Tantra is pretty natural, pretty normal. Every kid in the world at some point says, yuck, smell this, and then they offer you a chance to sniff, inspect, or even touch a truly disgusting and putrid whatever that they happen to have found or made. Touching a gross thing is a tiny tantric reversal. You move toward what repels you, and you steady your emotions, mind, and courage for staying present and feeling into something beyond your immediate reactions. That's not much different than fasting, walking on hot coals, or taking a vow of celibacy. They all involve volunteering your nervous system to undergo intensities that it will automatically pull back from. You have to stay at it on purpose, or you'll automatically shift into some more normal behavior. Nothing wrong with normal behavior, unless, of course, you get Alzheimer's from decades of repetitive thoughts, feelings, actions, and statements. But in spiritual practice, a common theme is that you have to reach forward on purpose like a kid invited to smell something gross. You have to be willing to feel all the weird ways it's going to make you feel. And if you do that, you'll emerge stronger, more sure of your values, more energized, less cringing. Another gift on the way of reversals.
To the top of the slide, and I stop and I turn and I go for a ride till I get to the bottom and I see you again. See you again. To you, don't you want me to love you? I'm coming down fast, but I'm miles above you. Tell me, come on, tell me the answer. You may be a lover, but you ain't no dancer. Helter skelter, helter skelter, helter skelter. Will you, won't you want me to make you? I'm coming down fast, so don't let me break you. Tell me the answer. You may be a lover, but you ain't no dancer. Look out, helter skelter, helter skelter, helter skelter. Look out. Here she comes.
Secession's cover of Helter Skelter, the Beatles classic featured in Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which tangentially covers the Manson family's attempt to reverse the conventional social order, but Tarantino reverses that ending, and in a way, so did history, putting all those people in a prison deep within the belly of the existing social order. Now, it should be obvious to you that you got to get up to get down, and that 3 right turns do make a left, and that haste makes waste, but he who hesitates is lost. I'm a strong proponent of pondering these sayings of popular wisdom. In some ways, all the Bibles and holy texts of the world are versions of the wisdom of popular sayings that got passed down to us from our ancestors and then recorded. The fact that they were passed down means in a way that they were vetted, verified, that they stuck around because they had staying power, and that many, many people feel they mean something. That maybe a hidden heuristic key exists in them to adaptively respond to the transrational complexity of the world around us. The great passed down sayings are an obvious place to search for wisdom. A less obvious place, conversely, is among people who strike you as obnoxious, perverse, and dangerously wrong-minded. Speaking of wrong-minded reversals, have you ever heard of reverse racism? My friend Doug tried to explain it to me the other day, but he takes so much homemade medication that he drools and mumbles every time he opens his mouth, and I could barely understand a word he was saying. Get yourself together, Doug! Less is more. Anyway, apparently there are these people who feel like reverse racism is a much bigger problem than regular racism. And that's almost certainly not true in the objective sense. Certain types of people are in prisons a lot more for the same crimes that other types of people also commit. Certain types of humans were brutally enslaved for years, and certain types, all things being equal and different preferences being accounted for, still make a lot less money in our society and receive a lot more suspicious glances than others. It's not all balanced. The Han Chinese are more racist to the Uyghurs than the Uyghurs are to the Han Chinese from an objective historical point of view. But that doesn't mean that historically and systemically significantly oppressed and marginalized groups aren't also prejudiced, mean, and racist too. It just means their racism has had a lot less impact. It's not a level playing field. Now, I get you could play a word game and secretly redefine racism as only being the intersection between average inherited privilege and the capacity to exert socioeconomic power within a given cultural context. That's a good thing to investigate, I think, but at that point, you're not really talking about racism anymore. Not exactly, anyway. I mean, you're not talking about what the word racism means for most people, which is simply, I think, the normal situation of intergroup animosity and self-protective deception-coded hostility toward apparent alternative ethnic groups, regardless of whether they're stronger, weaker, or equal to you in any particular sense. Reverse racism is a kind of oxymoronic term, then. It's really just a kind of racism, and we already have the word racism for that. You can be racist against a wealthy white male who gets treated with the benefit of the doubt in most shops on Main Street, and he can feel subjectively and individually ostracized, diminished, rejected, and threatened by your gaze, your attitude, and how you speak about him. That absolutely does happen. It just doesn't happen as often or as intensely as a historical average as the reverse situation, in which that fatuous good-time dolt and his systemic law enforcement allies get Man of the Year awards while bashing in the skulls of the darkies on the weekend. So there is definite and mostly predictable social imbalance. But even in an imbalanced situation, there is some weight on both sides of the scale. Attacking the hegemony, patriarchy, the mainstream, and the majority of the power possessors can sometimes be enacted in just as dumb and ugly a way as the reverse, especially at subtler levels. That's why it might be worthwhile for authentic anti-racists to want to explore reverse racism, and I'll tell you why. Of course, it's easy to see prominent, repeated, massive, historical, racially distinct interhuman suppression and savagery, just like it's easier to see a large, buxom chest or hear an irritatingly loud motorbike. There's no special skill in detecting what is easy to detect. But if you wanted to deepen your racism detection skills, you might want to look where it's hard for you to find it. Not just where you think lots of other people didn't look at it, but where you actually cannot initially detect it, where it eludes you upon first glance. If you want to take your deep understanding of racism to the next level, you may want to feel into places where other people claim to be receiving racism, but where you don't take that claim emotionally very seriously. I dare say if you find even a little bit of racism to be valid in situations that are the reverse of what you normally think and feel to be racist, then your personal understanding of racism, the vividness, nuance, and depth with which you see and viscerally understand what racism is, will increase considerably.
Give me your hands, show me the door. I cannot stand to wait anymore. Somebody said, be what you be. We could be old and cold and dead on the sea. But I love you more than words can say. Oh, I can't count the reasons I should stay. Give me some rope, time and a dream. Give me the hope to run out of steam. Somebody said it could be here. We could be roped up, tied up, dead in a year. I can't count the reasons I should stay. One by one, they all just fade away. I'm tired of the wait and sees. I'm tired of that part of me that makes up a perfect lie to keep us between. But I was turning the days, so watch what you throw away and be able to recognize there's another way. Give me some more time and a dream. Give me the hope to run out of steam. Somebody said it could be here. We could be roped up, tied up, dead in a year. Oh, I love you more than words can say. Oh, I can't count the reasons I should stay. One by one, they all just fade away. Oh, I love you more than words can say.
The phrase "the darkest timeline" comes from an episode of the now defunct sitcom Community, in which the gang rolls dice to see who has to go down to the front door and get the pizza. We just heard the theme song from that show, called "At Least It Was Here" by the 88. Now, in that episode, we follow each of the different possible outcomes through a many worlds multiverse where the different timelines start to diverge after we see each different person go down to get the pizza. In one of those timelines, the darkest timeline, things go terribly. All the worst stuff happens. People are killed, injured, driven to psychosis, and in a nod to classic original Star Trek episodes in which Kirk and the crew met their evil Bizarro versions, the people from the darkest timeline start wearing sinister goatee beards. And these evil versions appear in later episodes of the show as haunting reminders of the darkest timeline, in which all our good is inverted through the funhouse mirror between the worlds into a terrible, selfish, and vile version of everything we hope to be. It's very similar in a way to the cartoon idea of how Satan evolved into God's upside-down mirror image, an idea still used by intelligent, funny, and socially active groups like the Satanic Temple, not to be confused with those degenerates from the Church of Satan, as a sign of their moral impulse to liberate people by inverting the standard received institutionally embedded notions of blinkered goodness that were taught, perhaps in opposition to learning how to unearth our own innate organic conscience. If you're interested in reversals and reversals of reversals, check out the 2019 documentary Hail Satan. That's Hail Satan with a question mark, not Hail Satan with an exclamation mark. It's not a dogma, it's an invitation to experimentally flip your ideas about good and bad for a little while and see what it's like. It's really quite a fun little documentary. And if you love Satan, ironically, sometimes, or even if you just say to hell with it once in a while, you might enjoy the sitcom Silicon Valley, which mocks the peculiar attitudes of the tech community in California, but features an illegal Canadian immigrant named Guilfoyle who just happens to worship the Dark Lord. Although, as with a lot of Satanists, you're never sure if it's a joke or not. Anyway, here's the opening song of Silicon Valley.
It's the way you go.
That was Stretch Your Face by Tobacco, main theme from Silicon Valley, and then L'Orchestre Cinématique doing the main theme from the excellent Hannibal TV show, which is really a reversal and remix of all the motifs from the books and movies about Thomas Harris's character Hannibal the Cannibal. Now, Fred Nietzsche's famous transvaluation of all values is a formula of cosmic reversal for trying to heal and purify our culture and ourselves. Yes, we all inherit many values and attitudes from our ancestors, our culture, our parents, and our life experiences. We're all sort of passive recipients, though, of those values and have no immediate ability to determine if our values are actually valuable or whether we just believe they're valuable. For some people, that ignorance might be the best thing for them, but for others, and maybe for the long-term well-being and flourishing of human civilization, we might need to develop tools and strategies for reevaluating our values, for distinguishing healthy values from pathological values, teasing apart values that are self-consistent, significant, and realistic from those that are self-destructive, irrationally idealistic, or self-contradictory. How do we do that? How do we even begin to approach such a monumental task as testing, verifying, creating, cultivating, and choosing between people's real values and between our own real values? What an enormous and strange task. The first step on such a journey, if we are interested in taking it, lies in being able to flip each of our values over on their backs like crabs or turtles and have a look at the vulnerable underside. If we cannot reverse any one of our values, play with it, reset the value of its value, then we basically have no capacity to judge it or inspect it objectively. If we cannot even consider what would be valuable about the opposite of our values, then we will always live in insulated contradiction, opposed from the values of others, and will never really know which of our feelings about goodness might be secretly infected with slow-release awfulness. That's why we need something like the transvaluation of all values. Nietzsche joked he philosophized with a hammer. He meant that he went up to each of his own ideals and each of the ideals in his culture and whacked them hard to see if they'd break. He wasn't advocating a world of no values. He was advocating a world of robust values, only the ones that survive the critique and also any other new ones we create that are equally hardy and relatively free from incipient regression. Well, we're coming to the end of the show. I mean, the beginning of the show right now. Yesterday, on today's Mixed Up Look Forward and Backwards at the opposite of reversals, where black is white, truth is false, and every sane idea goes out the indoor walking on its hands. I'm Upside Down Layman Pascal on the Asylum Cinematique on CILU 102.7 FM. And to take us out and away, here's a little bit of the Twin Peaks Black Lodge backwards speaking from Michael Anderson, the Dancing Dwarf, before he mutated into a tree with a little of Canada's own FM radio gods in the background. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again last week.
I've got good news. That the music is going to come back in style. She's my cousin. But doesn't she look almost exactly it was for Palmer?
But it is Laura Palmer. Are you Laura Palmer?
I feel like I know lost some arms. My arms went back. She's filled with secrets. Where we're from, the birds sing a pretty song. And there's always music in the air. I've got good news. That the music is going to come back in style. She's my cousin. But doesn't she look almost exactly it was for Palmer?
But it is Laura Palmer. Are you Laura Palmer?
Jag förlorar jag någon. Vad som starens. My arms went back. She's filled with secrets. Where we're from, the birds sing a pretty song. And there's always music in the air. I've got good news. That the mule wash is going to come back in style. She's my cousin. But doesn't she look almost exactly it was Laura Palmer?
But it is Laura Palmer. Are you Laura Palmer?
Jag förlorar jag någon. Vad som starens. My arms went back.